You are just a nuisance, Dad. You can't even carry your own cane anymore. Robert didn't say a thing. He couldn't. The sentence had just plunged into his ribs like a knife. He gritted his teeth. He felt his throat close up and looked down. Beside him, Mary held on tight to the only being that hadn't abandoned them. Their faithful stray dog, soaking wet from the rain, his little eyes trembling as if he understood perfectly what was happening. "They are just going to leave us here, just like that," she murmured in a broken voice. "You can't be alone in the house anymore, Mum. We sold the farm for your own good." The white pickup truck, covered in mud, stopped on a forgotten stretch of road between Phoenix and Flagstaff, in the state of Arizona. There were no houses, no traffic, only wind, rain, and desolation. The three children got out without looking at them. Richard, the oldest, threw the old suitcase on the ground. Stephen didn't say a single word. Andrew, the youngest, barely looked at them with watery eyes, like someone who wants to scream but can't. Faithful barked once. It wasn't aggressive. It was a bark of warning, of pain. "Be careful, okay?" Andrew said in a low voice, before getting back into the rear seat. The truck sped off, and the distance swallowed them whole. Mary fell to her knees in the mud. The cold water covered her feet. She hugged Faithful as if he could protect her from everything. Robert stood his ground out of pure pride, but his legs were shaking. "They left us, Mary. They left us like we were old furniture." That was the moment everything changed. And if you also believe that no one deserves to grow old being forgotten, stick around until the end of this story. But first, if this scene touched your heart, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell to receive more stories like this. Also tell us in the comments what state and city you are watching this video from. We read every message with care. Now then, let's continue. A few minutes passed, maybe hours. Time ceased to have meaning between the cold, the silence, and the rain. Faithful didn't move from Mary's side. Robert stared at the empty road, waiting for something. And that something arrived. A husky engine sound could be heard in the distance. A red semi-truck covered by a blue tarp was approaching slowly. The driver, seeing the soaked couple on the side of the road, slammed on the brakes. He got out immediately. He was a man with a face weathered by the sun, a thick moustache, and a loud voice. His name was Mr. Henry. "Good heavens! What are you doing here in this storm? Where is your family?" Mary couldn't answer. Faithful barked again. Henry looked at him, then saw the wet suitcase, her mud-covered shoes, her tearful eyes. "Say no more. Get in. I'm not going to leave you here." Robert hesitated for an instant. He didn't like owing favors to anyone. But Mary looked at him, and in her eyes there was no pride, only pleading. The truck moved forward between hills and curves. Mary held Faithful as if he were a sleeping child. Robert remained silent until he finally spoke. "We were good parents, Henry. We worked hard. We gave them an education. They never lacked for anything." "And now they leave you in the rain," the driver murmured, shaking his head. "They are unforgivable. Do you think they will understand someday? That they will come back?" Henry took a while to answer. "Sometimes it's not a matter of understanding, Mr. Robert. It's a matter of conscience, and you either have it or you don't." Upon reaching Flagstaff, Henry took them to a humble-looking boarding house. It had a small white fence and a sign that read, "Lupe's Inn." Mrs. Lupe was a dry woman, but not cruel. Seeing the dog in Mary's arms, she frowned. "We don't allow animals here." Mary lowered her head. Faithful started trembling. "He's all I have left," she whispered. Lupe looked at her, looked at the dog, then at Henry. Fine, but for $5 more. Mary smiled for the first time. Faithful licked her hand as if saying, "Thank you." That night, while listening to the rain beat on the shingles, Mary and Robert didn't sleep. Faithful curled up at the foot of the bed. They didn't know that this storm was only the beginning, that at the bottom of that old, wet suitcase, something was hidden that would change their lives forever. The truck rattled with every curve, shaking the empty bottles that rolled under the seat. Inside, the silence weighed more than the mud on the tires. Mr. Henry drove with one hand on the steering wheel and the other on the edge of the open window, where an antique rosary hung. He had spent more than 30 years travelling roads from north to south, and in all those years he had never seen anything that churned his stomach as much as the scene from an hour ago. Robert was quiet, his eyes lost on the road they were leaving behind. Sitting next to him, Mary held Faithful as if he were her last hope. The animal didn't stop looking at the old man, barely wagging his tail when he sensed he was taking a deeper breath. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Henry asked, without taking his eyes off the road ahead. Mary shook her head. "Nothing. No family, no house, no plans. Nothing." "And your children?" "They kept everything," Robert said, dryly. Henry clenched his jaw. He wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. He took a deep breath and slowed down as he approached a tight curve. "I know a boarding house in downtown Flagstaff. It's not much, but at least you'll have a roof and hot food." "We will pay you back," Robert clarified. "We don't want charity." Henry glanced at him. "I'm not giving anything away, sir. I'm doing what needs to be done." Robert lowered his gaze. Mary stroked his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. They spent the rest of the journey without speaking. Faithful curled up between them, overcome by exhaustion. Outside, the clouds were beginning to break, and rays of sunshine were peeking through the hills. When they arrived in Flagstaff, the town was quiet. The cobblestone streets, the low houses, and the smell of freshly baked bread welcomed them with that warmth that only old northern towns can offer. Henry parked in front of a white-painted house with a faded sign that read, "Lupe's Inn." "Is this it?" "Lupe and I were neighbors many years ago. If she doesn't take you, then I'll insist." They got out of the truck. Mary carried Faithful while Robert grabbed the suitcase. The door of the inn opened without them knocking. A short woman with hard eyes and her hair pulled back came out to meet them. "Are you bringing people again, Henry?" she said, crossing her arms. "Just for a few days, Lupe. I beg you." She observed them carefully. She noticed their damp clothes, the worn suitcase, the way Mary was holding the dog. "No animals are allowed here." Mary lowered her gaze. Faithful licked her chin gently. "He doesn't bother anyone. He's clean. He doesn't bark. He's all I have left." Mrs. Lupe was silent for a few more seconds. Then she sighed and gestured with her hand. "Come in, ma'am, but it will be $5 more per night. I don't want hair on the blankets." Mary nodded immediately. "Thank you. Really, thank you." Henry approached Robert and patted him on the shoulder. "If you need anything, I'll be around for a few days. I'm going to be unloading at the market warehouse. We have no way to repay you for what you did today." Henry looked him in the eyes. "What your children did, that can't be paid for with anything. Mine is not a favor. It's justice." The room was small, with 2 narrow beds, a wooden table, and a window that looked out onto an alley. Mary dried Faithful with an old towel that Lupe lent them. The animal lay down in a corner, exhausted but serene. Robert sat on the bed without taking off his shoes. Mary came closer and took his hand. "You didn't cry," not even when they left. If I cried, I wouldn't stop. She moved closer and leaned her head on his shoulder. And now what are we going to do? He shrugged. We'll see tomorrow. Today I just want to sleep and for this day to end. Do you think they will ever regret it? Robert took a deep breath. I don't know, Mary. But if they don't, I hope life teaches them something, because we have already learned. Mary nodded slowly. I learned that dogs take better care of you than some children. Faithful, as if he had heard his name, wagged his tail without opening his eyes. The next morning the roosters crowed before dawn. Mary got up silently. She made coffee, with what was in a small bag that Henry had left them, and she sat by the window with an old notebook she found in the drawer. What are you doing? Robert asked, half asleep. I'm doing some calculations. If I make bread like I used to, maybe I can sell it here in town. I haven't forgotten the recipe. He sat up slowly. Do you have the strength for that? I don't know if I have the strength, but I have the courage. I don't want to die sitting here waiting for the days to pass. Robert stared at her. You were always braver than me. Mary smiled slightly. And you were always more stubborn. So if you support me, we will get ahead. Robert nodded. We'll try it. Faithful was still lying down, calm. But as soon as Mary stood up, he got up too. He followed her down the hallway, through the kitchen, through the courtyard, and when she opened the front door to go out and buy flour, he stopped right at the edge, without crossing, as if he knew that this place was now their home, or at least their hope. Behind an old curtain, Mrs. Lupe watched everything, and although she didn't say a single word, an expression that she hadn't worn in a long time appeared on her face. Something between doubt and respect. But what Mary didn't know was that at the bottom of the suitcase, right under an old linen blouse and a Bible with worn covers, there was something that her children hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to see. A piece of paper, a forgotten document, one that held a truth that was about to awaken. Mary was kneeling in front of the old suitcase they had brought from Phoenix, the same one Richard threw into the mud without looking back. It still had damp marks, dried mud on the sides, and the stale smell of having been exposed to abandonment, cold, and contempt. The room was silent. Robert was asleep, overcome by exhaustion and accumulated sadness. Faithful was breathing deeply, stretched out next to the door, attentive to Mary's every movement, as if guarding her soul. The kerosene lamp sputtered on top of the dresser, casting long shadows on the walls. Mary began to take out the few belongings that remained inside. A cardigan knitted by her own hands, 2 of Robert's shirts, the sewing box she inherited from her mother, a pair of socks with a badly done patch, the old Bible with the cover coming off, and at the bottom, among wrinkled papers that she didn't even remember, a sealed envelope with a nearly erased stamp. She froze as if she had found a sleeping viper. She took it with both hands, observed it. It had her husband's name written in the handwriting of a deceased person, Robert Harrison, personal. She recognized it immediately. It was the calligraphy of Mr. Arthur, Robert's father. She unfolded the paper slowly. What she held in her hands was a deed of ownership, dated more than 30 years ago, signed in Dallas, Texas. The document mentioned 15 acres of fertile land legally inherited by Robert, personally, as his father's last will. Mary read and reread it. The letters were not erased. The paper was yellowed, but whole. She opened the Bible and found a note stored inside, written on a napkin. Son, if you ever need to start over, these lands are yours. Make them count. Forgive whoever you need to, but don't forget who you are. Her heart was beating so hard that she thought she would wake Robert. She didn't. She watched him sleep with his jaw tense, as if even in dreams he was still fighting with his own thoughts. Mary got up without making a sound, put the deed inside the Bible, wrapped everything with a clean blouse, and placed the suitcase back under the bed. She sat by the window with a blanket over her shoulders. She couldn't stop thinking. Her children didn't know about that document. Or maybe they did, and that's why the suitcase was thrown into the mud like trash. Maybe they saw it and didn't understand it. Maybe they didn't see it, and that would have been even crueler, wanting to get rid of their parents without even knowing what they were giving away. She closed her eyes, but didn't sleep. She couldn't. Something inside her had awakened. The next morning, Robert woke up with a backache. Mary served him coffee that she had warmed on the stove in the courtyard. Faithful watched them with his snout on his paws. "Robert," Mary said calmly, "I have something to show you." He looked at her without saying anything. She took the Bible from under the bed, opened it, and handed him the deed. Robert read in silence, his eyebrows furrowed. When he finished, he held it with both hands as if it were a newborn baby. "Where did you find this?" "In the suitcase. It was folded inside a bag. It had your name." Robert swallowed. "My father told me about these lands before he died, but I never knew if he had left the papers. And since no one mentioned anything after the funeral, I thought he had sold them or that it was an empty promise." Mary shook her head. "It wasn't empty. Here it is, Robert, and it's yours." He looked at her with teary eyes. "Dallas, Texas. How long has it been since we went there?" "Since Andrew was born," she replied. "More than 40 years. Do you think they're still unoccupied?" "I don't know, but that no longer matters. If they are occupied, we'll see what to do. But if they are free, we could have a place, a real place." Robert got up slowly. He walked back and forth across the room with the document in his hand. "What if they take this away from us? If they say too much time has passed? We can go to a lawyer, let him tell us what to do. But we can't stay here forever, Robert. Not in this room, not depending on the goodwill of others. This may be the last chance we have." Faithful approached and sat at his feet. Robert looked at him. "What do you think, buddy? Should we go on another trip?" The dog wagged his tail. That same day they went looking for Mr. Henry at the market. They found him unloading sacks of corn in a warehouse. He offered them water and sweet bread and listened carefully to everything Mary told him. "I know a lawyer in town. Serious, proper. His name is Benitez. He's old, but he knows what he's doing. If this is legal, he'll know." Henry accompanied them to a simple office next to the courthouse. Lawyer Benitez received them courteously and put on his glasses to review the document. He read it in detail, in silence, and then leaned back in his worn leather chair. "Mr. Robert, this deed is valid. It has all the stamps. The lands are still in your name, and there is no record of sale or transfer in the last 3 decades. But—" Mary tensed. "But what? It could be that someone is occupying those lands, without your permission, without right, but with enough time to claim possession." Robert frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means that if they haven't been invaded, they are yours. But if they are being used, we will have to fight for them. With papers, with patience, and with time." Mary looked at Robert. "We can go see, right?" The lawyer nodded. "That's best. I can accompany you if you want, but I can also give you a letter that confirms the property. That's enough to start any process, if necessary." Robert stood up. "We're going, and we're going to see with our own eyes what's there." Mary got up with him. We don't want to take anything from anyone, but we are not going to keep losing the little we have left either. Benitez gave them the letter and gave them directions to get to Dallas via a safe route. Henry offered to take them in his truck as far as Fort Worth. From there, they would have to take a bus. "Are you sure about this?" he asked them before saying goodbye. Robert looked at him, with his hand on Mary's shoulder and Faithful by his side. "We're not sure about anything, Henry, but not doing anything, that certainly won't save us." Henry nodded. He gave them his blessing with crossed fingers and watched them walk away, with the suitcase in one hand, their hearts in the other, and a dog that seemed to understand the weight of every step. And although the road was long, what awaited them in those forgotten lands was much more complex than a simple trip, because there were people living on what was once theirs. The bus that took them from Fort Worth to Dallas was old, creaked at every curve, and smelled of dampness mixed with diesel. Mary sat next to the window, tightly holding the briefcase where they kept the deed. Robert stared at the road in silence. Faithful, lying at his feet, slept with his head resting on his paws, as if the peace of the movement was restoring some confidence to him. They barely spoke during the journey. They had been through too much in a short time, and what they felt now was not exactly hope, but a strange mixture of fear and obligation. Knowing that those lands were still legally theirs gave them right, yes, but it also opened the door to confronting the unknown. People, stories that perhaps were already taking root, where one day, many years ago, Mr. Arthur planted a future for his son. When they arrived at the Dallas bus station, the sun was shining brightly. Mary got off the bus first, with Faithful walking by her side. Robert, with the suitcase in his hand and his hat down, stopped for a moment to breathe the hot air of that land that had been his on paper, but not in memory. "It smells the same," he said, as if to himself. "The same as what?" "To toasted corn, dry earth, and country air, like when I was a child." They walked a few blocks to a small diner where they ate something simple: refried beans, freshly made tortillas, and watered-down coffee. Mary barely tasted her food. She kept looking at the briefcase. "What if they are already using it?" she asked. "Then we'll see about it. That doesn't change the fact that it belongs to us." "But if there are children, Robert, if there are poor people, I won't be able to take it away from them." He didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window. "I don't want to take anything from anyone, Mary, but I also don't want to die seeing how my own children drove us out of the little we had. I'm not going to settle for them leaving us thrown out like trash." She lowered her gaze. Faithful, as if sensing the tension, lay down on her feet. They finished eating and headed towards the dirt road that led to the property. Lawyer Benitez had given them a clear description: a rectangular plot, bordered by mesquite and cactus, with a small stream running through one of the corners. They took a local taxi to the entrance of the old road and walked the rest of the way. Faithful ran from side to side, happy to be surrounded by the countryside. Mary, with her blouse soaked in sweat, did not complain. Robert walked with firm steps, as if every meter brought him closer not only to his land, but to something deeper. After almost half an hour, they saw it. A simple house, built with unplastered concrete blocks, a rusty tin roof, and a fence made of wire and branches. There was laundry hanging, a red tricycle in the shade of a tree, and in the background, a woman washing clothes at a makeshift wash basin. Next to her, two small children played with a deflated ball. Mary stopped abruptly. Robert looked at her. She shook her head, as if the mere sight of those children weighed on her more than any legal right. "And now what?" she asked, in a low voice. "Now we see who they are," he replied, without hesitation. They walked towards the entrance. Faithful barked once, not with menace, but with curiosity. The woman saw them, wiped her hands on her apron, and came out to meet them, leaving the wash basin. "Good afternoon," Mary said, her voice trembling. "Afternoon," the woman replied suspiciously. "Are you looking for someone?" "Not exactly," Robert intervened, pulling out the envelope with the deed. "We came because this land, these properties, were my father's, and according to the papers, they are still ours." The woman frowned. She called someone with a shout. "Matthew!" A thin man, with a pale face and slow walk, came out from inside the house. He leaned on a cane. He coughed before speaking. "What's going on?" Mary repeated what Robert had said. Matthew took the paper, read it in silence, and then looked at them with a mixture of sadness and worry. "We've been here for 9 years," he said. "We found the land empty, no fences, nothing. No one came in all this time. We thought it was abandoned. We cultivated it, raised chickens, planted beans. Our children grew up here." "We never sold these lands," Robert said. "I never signed anything. They are ours." Matthew nodded slowly. "I understand. But we have nowhere to go. We don't have any money. We barely make enough to eat. And now I'm sick. My lungs can't take any more. I can hardly work." Mary looked at him and felt a pang in her chest. The children appeared behind the door, with wide eyes, holding on to their mother's legs. "We didn't come to run anyone off," Mary said suddenly. "We just wanted to see." "And what are you going to do now?" asked the woman, whose name was Teresa. Robert put the paper away, looked at the land, the plants, the makeshift chicken coop, the clothes hanging in the wind. Everything breathed effort. "I don't know. Tomorrow. Maybe I'll know." Mary lowered her gaze. Faithful approached the children, who initially backed away, but then one of them petted his head. The wind blew through the mesquite trees. The silence was deep. Matthew held onto the door frame. He coughed again. His wife took his arm. Robert and Mary looked at each other, and without saying anything else, they began to walk away along the same path they had come on, followed by Faithful, who turned back every so often toward the children, as if he didn't want to leave them. They still didn't know what they would do, but in Mary's chest something was already breaking, or rebuilding, and what was about to be born was not just a decision, but something much deeper. Sometimes the roots of a land are not in the soil, but in the conscience. And that night, upon returning to town to sleep in a rented room, neither of their consciences allowed them to close their eyes. The morning in Dallas dawned warm, with a cloudless blue sky. The air smelled of sweet bread and wood smoke. Mr. Robert and Mrs. Mary walked in silence from the rented room to the local taxi stand. They carried some bread for the road in a cloth bag, and the briefcase with the deed securely stored. Faithful walked ahead of them, sniffing every corner, as if he had known that place forever. They took a taxi to the entrance of the dirt road that led to the property. This time they were not going with the fearful curiosity of the first visit, but with a weight in their chest. They had already seen Teresa and Matthew. They had already felt the presence of those children playing in the sun. They knew that behind every makeshift wall were entire lives built with effort. Mary, as they walked, went over and over the scene from the previous day. Matthew, leaning on his cane, pale, almost breathless. Teresa with hands red from the wash basin soap, the children behind the door. She thought of her own home, of the days when Richard and Stephen played in the yard, of the way she herself washed clothes under the sun so that they lacked nothing. It was impossible not to feel a reflection. "I don't want to fight, Robert," Mary said, breaking the silence. I don't want us to become the same as what they did to us. No one wants to fight, he replied. But no one defended us either when they left us on the highway. If we don't defend this, what do we have left? She did not answer. She walked slower, letting Faithful go ahead. The dog ran along the path, kicking up small clouds of dust with his paws. Upon reaching the property, the sun was high. The children were playing again, this time with an old rope. Faithful approached slowly, wagging his tail. The children smiled and threw him a piece of tortilla. Faithful caught it in the air and chewed it calmly. Mary watched the scene from a distance, her eyes filled with tears without her realizing it. Teresa came out of the wash basin, wiping her hands on her apron. Seeing them, she walked toward the fence. "You came back?" she said cautiously. "Yes," Robert replied, pulling out the envelope. "We need to talk." Teresa nodded. She called Matthew, who slowly came out of the house, coughing. He leaned on the doorframe and looked at them with a mixture of resignation and pride. "Come in," Matthew said. "We have nothing to hide." They entered the property. The land was well worked, rows of beans, some corn plants, chickens, pshigitsas pecking the ground. There was an ordered humility, a silent struggle in every corner. Robert felt his hands tremble. Mary looked at everything with wide eyes. They sat down on old chairs under the shade of a mesquite tree. Teresa served water in plastic cups. Matthew breathed with difficulty before each sentence. "We know this is yours," Matthew said. "We don't deny it. When we arrived, it was empty. We thought no one wanted it. No one ever came. My father left it to me," Robert replied. "And my children, they stripped us of everything except this deed." Matthew nodded. "We don't want trouble, but we have nowhere else to go. I can't work like I used to. If we leave, my children will be on the street." Mary looked at the children. One of them was stroking Faithful as if he were a lifelong friend. Something inside her broke. "It's not our intention to run you off," Mary said, "but we need to think. We can't just stay here as if nothing happened." "Of course," Teresa said. "We understand." The silence became heavy. They could hear the wind through the cactus and the cackling of the chickens. Robert took a sip of water, looked at the land, and then at Mary. His eyes said things his lips could not. "We'll be back tomorrow," he finally said. "We need to talk it over among ourselves." They stood up. Teresa accompanied them to the entrance. Matthew stayed under the mesquite tree, coughing. The children kept stroking Faithful until Mary called him. The dog looked at them with something akin to sadness before returning to his owners. Upon leaving the property, Robert and Mary walked in silence along the path. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky was turning golden. Mary breathed deeply, as if she wanted to hold all that air in her chest so she wouldn't forget. Robert clenched the deed in his hand. "This land is not empty, Mary," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the road. "It has history, it has life, and now it has a problem." Mary glanced at him. She didn't respond. But in her mind, a decision was beginning to form, still small, still trembling. Faithful walked beside them, looking back every so often, as if he didn't want to leave those children or that tin-roofed house behind. That night, back in their rented room in town, Mary couldn't sleep. She got up and sat by the window. The briefcase with the deed was on the table. Robert was snoring softly. Outside, the moon lit up the stone street. She thought of Teresa's hands washing clothes, of Matthew's cough, of the wide eyes of those children. She thought of her own life, of her son's. She thought of Faithful, who slept at her feet. And she felt, for the first time in many months, that what was at stake was not just land, but something much deeper, the kind of people they were going to be after everything. As the night progressed, Mary heard a faint noise in the street. She looked out. There, on the corner, under the light of a street lamp, was a tall man in a hat leaning against a post. He was watching her from afar. He was barely a shadow, but something in his posture seemed familiar to her. She blinked. When she looked again, the man was gone. The sunrise brought with it warm air, filled with the crowing of roosters in the distance and the crunching of the first branches breaking under the wind's footsteps. Mary hadn't slept. She remained sitting by the window until the sky went from dark blue to pale orange. She clearly remembered that silhouette under the street lamp the night before. She couldn't be sure if it was Richard, but something in his posture, in the way he remained still, seemed too familiar to her. She didn't say anything to Robert. She kept the image in silence, like someone who hides a premonition so as not to stain the hope that was still forming. Mid-morning, after having coffee and bread, they returned to the property. This time Teresa received them with swollen eyes, but without tears. Matthew was sitting in a makeshift rocking chair with a damp cloth on his forehead. His breathing was shallow. Each cough doubled him over, as if something inside him was slowly going out. Mary approached without speaking. She crouched in front of Matthew and offered him a cup of tea she had brought in a thermos. He took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," he murmured, unable to hold her gaze. Teresa invited them in. Robert hesitated but entered. The inside of the house was simple. A wooden table, 2 chairs, an old stove, a couple of cots. The walls were adorned with drawings by the children made with crayons. There was a poor but dignified peace in every corner. The children, seeing Faithful, ran to hug him. The dog received them happily. Mary smiled slightly. "How did you spend the night?" Teresa asked. "Thinking," Mary replied. "A lot?" Robert remained silent. He walked around the house with his hands behind his back, observing every detail like someone looking for something beyond the visible. Finally, he stopped in front of the window and spoke without turning around. "I know what the law says. I know this land is ours. I have the right to claim it, to ask you to leave. And believe me, I don't lack reasons." Matthew lowered his head. "We know." "But I also know what it's like to be left with nothing," Robert continued. "I know what it's like to have your home taken away, for your children to abandon you, to be left with wet clothes and a broken suitcase. I can't. I don't want to do the same to you." Mary looked at him with wide eyes. She didn't know what he was about to say. "We will not make any decision today," he said, finally turning around. "But if we are going to stay, if this land is going to continue to be ours, it will have to be with you here, not as intruders, but as something more, as part of the agreement." Teresa pressed her lips together. She didn't say anything. Mary approached her and took her hand. "We want to think together, not fight. But we also want to rebuild our lives. And that's not done with words, it's done with land, with work, with effort." Matthew smiled sadly. "I am no longer good for that." "But she is," Mary replied, looking at Teresa. "And the children will grow up and they can also help." Robert nodded. "If you agree to work the land with us, if you are willing to share what is produced, we can find a way to make this work. It won't be easy, but it can be fair. For everyone." The silence that followed was long. The children continued playing with Faithful in the courtyard, oblivious to the tension floating in the air. Finally, Teresa spoke. "Why would you do something like that for us?" Mary looked at her tenderly. "Because I don't want to become what my sons have become." Teresa couldn't hold back her tears. She cried silently, covering her face with her hands. Mary hugged her. Matthew closed his eyes and whispered, "We are nobody to reject something like this." Mary stroked his shoulder. "This is not charity, it is shared dignity." They left the house and walked together to the edge of the property. Robert observed the field. He visualized straight rows, tall corn, fat chickens, and beyond that, he imagined something he hadn't even dared to think about, a place where old age was not synonymous with forgetfulness. As they walked down the path back to town, Mary walked in silence. Her heart was beating fast, but no longer from fear, but from something akin to determination. "Did you mean it?" she asked Robert, every word. "I didn't recognize you when you spoke." "Neither did I, but maybe that's not so bad." Faithful walked ahead of them with his tongue hanging out, as if he knew every stone on the path. As they passed an old light pole, the same one where Mary thought she had seen a silhouette the night before, he stopped. He growled softly, his body tense. His ears perked up. Mary froze. She looked around. "What is it, Faithful?" The dog sniffed the ground, spun in circles, and then started walking again, but slower, without stopping looking back. Robert frowned. That dog never growls for no reason. Mary didn't say anything, but something was stirring inside her, a feeling, a presence, as if someone else was watching them from the shadows of the past. The next day dawned with a cloudy sky and a cold wind blowing across the field, as if it knew that something important was about to be decided. Robert got up early, long before Mary opened her eyes. He sat at the table in the rented room, with the deed on the tablecloth, and looked at it for long minutes without moving a muscle. Mary found him there, with his elbows on the table, his face in his hands, and an expression that mixed resignation with purpose. "There's no turning back, is there?" she asked, serving him coffee with the little sugar they had left. "No," he said without looking up. "But there are new paths, and I think this is one worth taking." She sat across from him and held his gaze. "Are you sure?" "Not entirely, but when you've lost as much as we have, you learn to see with different eyes. They are not to blame for what happened to us, and they don't deserve for us to carry our pain on their backs." "And we don't deserve to disappear either," Mary added firmly. "That's exactly why we're going to stay, but not alone." They walked towards the property under a grey sky that threatened rain. Faithful walked ahead, attentive, as if he understood that this day was not like the others. When they arrived, Teresa was folding clothes on the clothesline. Seeing them, she dropped the basket and walked up to them. Matthew was resting inside the house, covered with a blanket, and the children were picking up seeds from the ground. "Good morning," Mary greeted them in a calm voice. "Good morning," Teresa replied, a little disconcerted. "Do you want to come in?" Robert shook his head. "We want to talk here. It won't take long." Teresa stood in silence, waiting. "We are going to stay," Robert said. "We are going to work this land. We are not going to sell it. We are not going to abandon it." Teresa nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. "And you?" Mary added. "If you want, you can stay too, but under an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" Teresa asked, frowning. "A fair one," Robert said. "We will share the harvest. Everything that comes out of this land will be divided. Half for you, half for us. We will help in whatever way we can. You will too. If this land produces more someday, then we all win. But it can no longer be as it has been until now." Teresa was speechless. Her hands were trembling. Mary took her hand. "It's not charity, Teresa. It's alliance. It's respect." Matthew slowly came out of the house, leaning on the doorframe, He listened to the last part of the conversation. "We accept," he said in a hoarse voice. "There's nothing to think about. No one has treated us with such dignity since we arrived here." Robert extended his hand. Matthew walked down the stairs with effort. Teresa held his arm, and with a strength that seemed borrowed from pride, Matthew shook Robert's hand. "Thank you, sir, on behalf of myself and my children." Mary hugged Teresa, and at that moment, something broke, not from sadness, but from relief. Finally, they were no longer alone. Finally, after so much wandering, a new stage was opening. That same day, the plans began. They cleared a part of the abandoned land. They repaired the planks of an old shed to store tools, and they decided that the first crops would be corn, squash, and beans. Mary would teach Teresa how to bake bread to sell in town, and Robert, although he no longer had the strength he once did, would be in charge of supervising the rows and teaching the children what he knew about the land. Faithful ran from side to side, barking with joy. The children chased him, and he only let them catch him when he wanted to. Teresa cooked a rice with vegetables, and they shared it among everyone, sitting in the courtyard, with tin plates and hot tortillas. Matthew ate little. His breathing was still heavy, but in his eyes there was a light that Mary had not seen before, a mixture of gratitude and rest, as if something inside him was beginning to heal. "I never thought this place could feel like a real home," he said, looking at the sky. "Neither did I," Robert replied, "and look where we are." After eating, while the children washed the dishes, Mary and Teresa talked sitting under a mesquite tree. "When they left us on the highway," Mary said, "I thought it was the end, that no one else in the world would open a door for us, not even a kind word." "I also thought that when Matthew got sick," Teresa replied, "even the neighbours stopped greeting us, as if we were already dead." Mary nodded, was silent for a moment, and then murmured, "Maybe that's why we found each other." Teresa looked at her tenderly. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence. The afternoon fell slowly, and with it a soft drizzle that refreshed the earth. The first drops wet the freshly sown seeds like a silent blessing. Back in the rented room, Mary was putting her things away, while Robert cleaned his boots. Faithful slept under the bed. The sound of the rain was relaxing, as if the sky was whispering something that they still couldn't understand. "Do you think it will work?" Mary asked. "I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, I want it to work." She hugged him from behind, rested her head on his shoulder, and said softly, "Me too." Faithful perked up one ear. Then he went back to sleep. Outside, on one of the corners of the town, in a quiet shadow, someone was watching, with a hat, with his hands in his pockets, and with a gaze that wasn't new. The sky dawned clear after days of light rain, as if the weather had also decided to cooperate with the new beginning. The air smelled of damp earth, and the sound of birds mixed with the rustling of leaves in the wind. Mary was the first to get up. She lit the fire in the wood stove and put water on to heat for coffee. On the wooden table that Matthew had made with his own hands, she spread out a new notebook that Teresa had given her. There she would write every expense, every sale, every step. Teresa came in shortly after, still with messy hair, but with a sincere smile. "Did you sleep well?" "I slept. Peacefully," Mary replied, "which is not the same, but it's something." The two shared a coffee in silence. Faithful slept at the entrance, with a paw over his snout, breathing slowly. The children were already awake, but they knew it was an important day and kept the commotion to a minimum. Robert appeared with his hat in his hand, still half asleep, but with a more relaxed face than usual. "We start today, right?" Mary handed him a damp cloth for the sweat that would come later. Today we are planting more than seeds, Robert. He nodded. He didn't say anything. But that day was the first, after a long time, that he felt he still had a purpose in this world. They divided the land into small plots. Mr. Robert marked the rows with a stick, just as he did in his youth. Teresa and Mary gathered seeds that Matthew had carefully saved for years. Heirloom corn, squash, beans. Nothing modern, nothing hybrid. Everything from the earth, for the earth. The children helped by carrying buckets of water. Faithful ran between the rows without stepping on a single plant, as if he knew that it was a sacred space. Matthew, from his wooden chair on the porch, watched in silence. His lungs no longer allowed him to work, but his eyes shone with pride as he saw his family and the new companions forming something together. At noon, Mary was sweating on her forehead, but her hands were not shaking. It had been years since she felt useful, alive. She took a break under the shade of a mesquite tree and took out a loaf of bread she had baked the night before. "Want to try it?" she offered to Teresa. Teresa bit the bread suspiciously, but soon her eyes widened in astonishment. "It's delicious. I used to make it to sell when the children were little, at the Phoenix market. I had my customers, until they left and I couldn't manage everything anymore." Teresa took her hand. "You could start doing it again. There's no bread like this in town. Everyone buys packaged bread." "Do you think anyone would buy it?" "Of course. I would buy it from you every day." Mary smiled for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, they made a bigger batch. Mary taught Teresa how to prepare the dough, how to monitor the baking without a clock, using only the smell and the sound of the bread when tapping it with her knuckles. That night, they took 10 loaves to town and returned with half of them sold and several orders for the next day. "We didn't sell bread," Teresa said as she counted the coins. "We sold history." As the weeks passed, the small community took shape. Mary and Teresa baked 3 times a week, and they took the loaves to the market wrapped in embroidered napkins. Customers began to ask about the origin, and when they heard that they came from a property on the outskirts, where a family worked alongside an elderly couple, they responded with admiration. "Good people," they said. "You can tell in the bread." Robert taught the children how to sew, how to conserve water, how to recognize good and bad insects. In the afternoons, he would sit with Matthew to chat, to reminisce about life, to laugh at what they could no longer do. Mary knitted at night, and Faithful slept at the foot of her bed, like a silent guardian. "Do you realize, Robert," she said one night while embroidering, "we are starting over, old, broken, and with the bare minimum, but we are starting. They took away our children, our house, our memories, and yet here we are. I don't know if you'd call it a miracle, Mary, but it's something. It's faith, even if we no longer know how to pray like before." He chuckled softly. "You always knew better than me what praying was." "No, Robert. I just closed my eyes and prayed for you." One day, as they returned from the market, Mary and Teresa stopped in front of the town church. An older woman approached them. "Are you the ones with the bread of hope?" "Excuse me?" Teresa asked, confused. "That's what they call the bread you sell, bread of hope, because they say a lady who bakes it was abandoned by her children, and instead of giving up, she decided to start over." Mary didn't know what to say. She just looked down. "Is that you?" the woman insisted. "Yes," Mary replied with a shaky voice. "It's me." The woman hugged her without saying anything else. That night, Mary told Robert what had happened. "Imagine, bread of hope." He looked at her and smiled tenderly. "And you know what the best part is? What? That we are not selling bread. We are planting something bigger, something that maybe others also need. Mary nodded. But there is a shadow. Something has been bothering me for days. What? I feel like someone is watching us, from afar, as if they don't want to get close, but they don't want to leave either. Robert remembered the man in the hat, the one he had seen on the corner the night they started the agreement. I've felt it too. I didn't want to tell you. Faithful, lying on the doorstep, raised his head. He growled softly, his ears tense. And at that moment, Mary knew that that shadow was not an invention of her mind. It was real, and it carried a last name she knew very well. The afternoon heat was heavy over the freshly watered rows. Robert stood next to the makeshift shed, checking the seeds they would save for the next planting. Mary was coming out of the oven with the last loaves of the day. The sweet aroma of lard and cinnamon filled the courtyard. Teresa was hanging up her children's clothes, while Matthew rested with his gaze fixed on the horizon. Everything seemed orderly, although there was a strange stillness in the air, like a calm before a storm. Faithful, lying next to the door, had his ears perked up. He had been like that for days, sniffing the wind, walking back and forth along the border of the property. The children played nearby without realizing it, but Mary watched him with concern. She had learned to trust the dog's instinct. Faithful was never agitated without reason. "This dog feels something," she said in a low voice, while kneading the next batch. "Something is coming, Robert." He didn't answer. He just wiped the sweat from her forehead with a cloth. The next day, when they returned from the town market with the sales of the Bread of Hope, they found them waiting. A grey car was parked at the entrance of the property, with the doors closed and the windows tinted. Faithful stood up, rigid, with the hair on his back bristling. Richard got out of the back door, impeccably dressed, with an expensive hat and dark glasses. His smile was cold, calculated. Behind him came Stephen, less elegant, but with the same hard expression. Andrew was not there. Mary felt her blood run cold. Robert clenched his fists without moving. "So this is where you were," Richard said in a loud voice. "We thought you no longer existed." "What are you doing here, Richard?" Robert asked in a grave voice. "The same as you, Dad. Coming to see my lands." "These are not your lands," Mary replied, clutching the briefcase against her chest. Richard laughed contemptuously. "Oh no? Then explain to me. How is it that an old couple, without a dime, now has a property in Dallas, working with strangers and selling bread as if they owned an empire?" Stephen watched his brother without speaking, but with a look of approval. "I told you it was true," he murmured to him. "We never sold this land," Robert said. "It's been mine since before you were born. Your grandfather left it to me. You kept the house, the cattle, everything. This is not to be touched." Richard took a step forward. "Don't talk to me like that. We are your children. You have obligations to us." "Obligations?" Mary repeated. "After leaving us on the highway? After selling the house without asking us?" Richard lowered his voice, but not his tone. "You were old. It was for your own good. But it seems you didn't learn. So I'm coming to claim what belongs to me." Robert looked him straight in the eye. "Nothing belongs to you." Faithful growled, moving a step forward. Richard stopped and raised his hands. "Now a dog is going to threaten me," he scoffed. "It doesn't change anything. Either you give me my share, or I'll take it from you." "You have no right," Mary said. "I have lawyers," Richard replied, "and more money than you can imagine. You are nothing against me." Stephen intervened for the first time. "Dad, Mum, Could we work this out? We could sell a part. It would be better for everyone. I'm not selling anything, Robert said. This land cost my father his life. I won't give it up. Richard took off his dark glasses and put them in his pocket. Then we'll see you in court. He turned around and got into the car. Stephen hesitated for a second before following him. He looked at his parents and Mary with a strange gesture, almost shame, and then lowered his head and got into the car. The engine roared and the car disappeared in the dust of the road. Mary sank into the nearest chair. Her hands were cold and her gaze was lost. Teresa came out of the house with the children hiding behind her. "Who were they?" she asked. "Our sons," Mary replied with a broken voice. "Or at least, they once were." Robert remained standing, breathing deeply, with his fists clenched. He looked at the rows, the chickens, the bread cooling on the table, everything they had built in weeks, everything that was barely germinating, and he felt that, once again, someone was trying to uproot it. Matthew cleared his throat to speak from his chair. "If you need witnesses, we are here," he said with difficulty. "You are the owners. We know the truth." Robert nodded, without taking his eyes off the road where the car had left. Faithful lay down again next to the door, but his ears remained alert, as if he knew that this was just beginning. And deep down in her instinct, Mary also knew it. That visit was not an end. It was a declaration of war disguised as a family reunion. The morning after the confrontation with Richard and Stephen dawned heavy. The air felt thick, almost metallic, and the sky seemed lower than normal. Mary prepared coffee without saying a word, while Robert checked the deed over and over again, as if he feared the letters would disappear at any moment. Faithful, at the foot of the table, wagged his tail listlessly, sensing the tension in the atmosphere. The blow came in the form of an envelope. A messenger from the municipal court delivered a notice. Richard and Stephen had filed a lawsuit requesting legal guardianship of their parents due to mental incapacity and the annulment of any act of possession over the land. Mary felt the world collapse when she read it. Robert clenched the paper until it crumpled. "They want to declare us crazy," he said in a broken voice. "They want to steal the only thing we have left." Mary sat down slowly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "It's not just the land," she whispered. "It's everything. It's as if they want to erase who we are." Robert took a deep breath, and for the first time since they arrived in Dallas, he slumped into a chair with trembling hands. Lawyer Benitez received them in his office with a serious expression. "It's a common tactic," he explained. "If a judge determines that you are not in full possession of your faculties, any document you present can be annulled, even the deed." "But that's not true," Mary intervened. "We are fine. We think, we talk, we decide." "I know, ma'am," Benitez replied, "but on paper they are the children, and children have an advantage when they claim to be caring for their parents. We are going to have to prove that you are completely capable, and it's going to be tough." Robert lowered his head. "I no longer have the strength for fights, lawyer." "Yes, you do," Mary cut him off with a firmness that surprised everyone. "And if you don't, I do. They are not going to take this land from us, not again." Benitez smiled slightly. "That's what I needed to hear. We are going to gather witnesses, documents, everything that proves that you are in charge of your lives and this property. Teresa, Matthew, Mr. Henry, Mrs. Lupe, everyone can help. But be prepared. Your children are going to use cruel words." Mary nodded, swallowing. "They already used them when they left us on the highway. They can't hurt me more than they did that day." The following days were a mixture of work and preparation. Mary and Teresa continued baking bread, But now they also made lists of witnesses and dates. Robert taught the children how to sew, although his mind was elsewhere. Matthew tried to help, but his health deteriorated and his cough became deeper. Faithful, on the other hand, was more attentive than ever. He slept next to the door, sniffed every visitor, followed Mary to the market like a shadow. The children adored him, but they also knew not to bother him when he growled softly. That meant someone was lurking. One afternoon, as Mary returned from town with Teresa, she saw a car parked in the distance, with its lights off. She couldn't make out faces, but she knew who they were. She kept walking without looking back. The day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse was an old building, with thick walls and worn mosaic floors. It smelled of dampness and old papers. Mary entered, holding Robert's arm. Faithful could not go in, so he stayed outside with Teresa and the children. Through the door, his shadow looked restless. Inside, Richard and Stephen were sitting with their lawyers, impeccable, talking in low voices. Andrew was not there. Mary looked for his face, but couldn't find it. The judge looked at them with a neutral expression. Richard's lawyers began with measured words, but loaded with venom. That their parents could no longer manage their assets, that they had been manipulated by strangers, that they were in danger. Mary squeezed Robert's hand under the table. When it was their turn to speak, Robert got up with effort. He didn't raise his voice, but every word came out clearly. We are not crazy. We are not incapable. We are elderly, yes, but we are free. My sons sold us out without permission, left us on the highway, took everything from us. And yet we are still standing. This land was left to me by my father. I didn't steal it. I didn't misuse it. I am working it with my hands. Richard shifted in his seat. Stephen looked down. Mary also spoke in a calm voice. I bake bread every day. I manage accounts. I buy and sell. I am not mentally ill. I am hurt in my heart, which is different. The room fell silent. The judge took notes. The hearing was postponed to allow more evidence to be presented. They left the courthouse with tired faces, but with a spark of dignity intact. Outside, Faithful greeted them with a wagging tail, but with tense ears. Teresa gave them water and a hug. Matthew, who had made the effort to go, coughed relentlessly. This is not over, Benitez said. It's just beginning. Mary took a deep breath, stroked Faithful's head, and looked at the horizon. The grey car was again parked at the end of the street. Someone inside was watching, motionless. And inside her, Mary felt that the real battle was not yet the legal one. It was another, much closer and much more painful. The courthouse was more crowded than the first time. A dense air, mixed with dust and murmurs, hung in the room. There were neighbours, curious people, and even some customers of the bread that Mary and Teresa sold in town. News of the trial had spread through Dallas like wildfire, and everyone wanted to see the dispute between the elderly parents and their sons up close. Mary entered holding Robert's arm. She wore a blue shawl that Teresa had lent her. Her hands were cold, but her steps were firm. Robert walked slowly, his gaze fixed straight ahead, like someone who knows that every step is a declaration of dignity. Faithful couldn't enter, but he stayed outside, lying next to the door, with his ears perked up and his eyes attentive. Teresa, Matthew, and the children waited with him. Inside, Richard and Stephen sat next to their lawyers, dressed in suits, with their hands crossed and a look of confidence. They didn't look up when their parents entered. Andrew, however, was in a corner, with his head bowed, like someone carrying something they can't confess. The judge, a woman with her hair pulled back and thin glasses, settled into her seat. Her voice was clear and unadorned. Today, we will hear witnesses, she announced. Each party will have an opportunity to speak. Richard's lawyer was the first. He used sweet but sharp words. He painted Robert and Mary as manipulative old people, incapable of handling legal matters, let alone a property. He said they had been influenced by strangers to take advantage of their sons. Mary squeezed Robert's hand under the table. When it was his turn, Robert stood up. He didn't need paper or notes. "I am not crazy," he said, his voice deep but firm. "This land has been mine since before my sons were born. My father left it to me because he trusted me. I didn't steal it. I didn't buy it with trickery. I worked it with my hands, and now I work it with my heart. My sons, my sons left me on a highway in the rain. If that doesn't show who takes care of whom, I don't know what else you need." A murmur went through the room. The judge raised her hand, and everything fell silent. "Let the witnesses come forward," she ordered. First, Mrs. Lupe entered. She walked straight to the stand. "I took them into my inn when no one else would. I saw how they arrived soaked with a broken suitcase and a skinny dog. No one manipulated anyone. If anyone has been good in this town, it is them." Then Mr. Henry entered. He took off his hat before speaking. "I found them on the highway, Your Honour. Their sons left them there. That is not gossip. I saw it. And if they are standing here today, it is because they have more dignity than many of those sitting in suits in this room." The judge nodded and took notes. Richard's lawyer tried to object, but she gestured for him to be quiet. Then it was Teresa's turn. She entered with her clean apron, but her hands were still damp from the wash basin. Her eyes shone with contained tears. "I live on the land with my husband and children. They didn't kick us out. They proposed sharing. No one manipulated us. No one asked us for anything in return. If my children eat today, it is because this couple decided to forgive instead of destroy." Matthew couldn't enter, but he sent a letter written with effort and signed with his own trembling hand, explaining his illness and thanking Robert and Mary for not having expelled them. Each testimony was like a stone, tearing down the wall of accusations built by Richard. The judge listened to everyone, without interrupting, and when Mary sat down again, she felt for the first time in a long time that she was not alone. Upon leaving the courthouse, the crowd parted to let them pass. Several people approached to shake their hands, to offer words of encouragement. Mary smiled humbly. Robert took a deep breath. "We haven't won yet," he murmured, "but at least we are no longer invisible." Andrew approached for a moment. His eyes were red. I didn't know they were going to go this far," he stammered. Mary looked at him without saying anything. Andrew lowered his head and left before Richard saw him. Faithful greeted them with a wagging tail. Teresa gave them water. Matthew raised his hand from the truck in a sign of support. That night, back in the room, Mary sat by the window. She looked at the silent street. Faithful slept at her feet. Robert was writing something on a sheet of paper. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I'm writing down everything that happened, so that no one can say it was different." She nodded. Outside, a grey car slowly passed in front of the house and stopped for a few seconds. Then it continued on its way, without lights. Mary felt a chill. She knew that the battle in court was not the only one they were fighting. Outside, in the shadows, something else was brewing, something that could break not only their rights, but also their hearts. The courtroom was more tense than ever. That morning the air smelled of dampness and old papers. The benches creaked with every movement of the people who had come to witness what everyone in town called the trial of shame. Mary entered holding Robert's arm. They walked slowly but with their heads held high. Faithful stayed outside, lying on the cold tiles with his ears perked up and his eyes fixed on the door, as if he knew that something that concerned him too was being decided inside. Richard and Stephen were already in their seats, in dark suits and with stony gazes. Andrew had arrived late and sat in a corner, away, like a scolded child. The judge, Marcella Galvan, with a serene but firm expression, skimmed the documents in front of her. On her table were several handwritten statements and a folder with the original deed to the land. Richard's lawyer began to speak. His voice was soft, but every phrase was sharp. "Your Honour," he insisted, "my clients are seeking to protect their parents. They are not in a condition to manage properties or businesses. They have been manipulated by third parties and are at risk." Mary felt her eyes burn, but she didn't lower her gaze. Robert squeezed her hand under the table. The judge looked up and spoke calmly. "I have heard the testimonies. I have read the statements of Mrs. Lupe, Mr. Henry, Teresa, and even Matthew's letter. They all agree that the Harrisons are not only in full possession of their faculties, but have demonstrated dignity and hard work. This court is not here to punish old age or poverty." A murmur went through the room. Richard clenched his jaw. Stephen swallowed. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am outraged to see children who, instead of caring, use the law as a weapon to dispossess their own parents. Family is not measured in inheritances or papers. It is measured in actions, and your actions have been shameful." Mary looked down, moved. Robert took a deep breath, as if a huge burden had fallen off his shoulders. "Therefore," the judge said, taking the gavel, "this court recognizes the deed of ownership in the name of Mr. Robert Harrison, recognizes the full mental capacity of both defendants, and dismisses the request for legal guardianship. Case closed." The bang of the gavel echoed throughout the room. A heavy silence fell. Andrew put his hands to his face. Richard stood up abruptly, but his lawyer grabbed his arm to calm him down. Stephen looked down, ashamed. Mary, with tears streaming down her cheeks, clung to Robert's hand. "We did it," she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak. Upon leaving the courthouse, the people outside applauded. Mrs. Lupe hugged Mary. Mr. Henry patted Robert on the back. Teresa, with the children, approached crying. "You won," she said. "We all won." Robert looked at her gratefully. "Now we have to show that it was worth it," he replied. Andrew approached slowly. His eyes were red. He started, but couldn't continue. Mary touched his arm without saying anything. He lowered his head and walked away before Richard saw him. Faithful jumped happily upon seeing them leave. He wagged his tail forcefully, circling Mary. She knelt down and stroked his head. "You always knew, didn't you?" she said softly. "You always knew they weren't going to break us." Robert took a deep breath and looked at the clear sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt that the air did not weigh him down. That night, back on their land, they sat under the mesquite tree. The moonlight fell on the green rose that had begun to grow. Teresa served him coffee. Matthew, though ill, smiled. "This is yours again," he said. "No one is going to take it away from you." Mary looked at the rose, the chickens, the children playing with Faithful, and something inside her began to form. An idea, a plan. Robert said softly, "This land saved us, and we can't keep it just for ourselves." He looked at her in silence, understanding without words. On the horizon, a car light passed slowly along the road and stopped for a few seconds before disappearing. Mary noticed it, and her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if it was Richard, a stranger, or a new problem approaching, but she knew that what they were about to decide would not only change their lives, but the lives of many others. The rows were turning green with vigor. The corn was growing evenly, and the bean plants were intertwining around the sticks that the children had staked as guides. The chickens walked among the crops with confidence, as if they also knew that something new was being created on that land. The morning after the trial, Mary sat under the mesquite tree that shaded the side of the house. She had a notebook in her hands, and on the cover she wrote in blue ink, "New Life Refuge Project." She hadn't talked about it with Robert yet, but the idea had been born from her soul and was throbbing in her chest like an old heartbeat that was finally finding its rhythm. "What are you writing?" he asked, approaching with his cup of coffee. "A plan," she replied without looking up. "I want to open up this land, not just for us, not just for Teresa or for the children. I want the forgotten to live here, the elderly who have nowhere to go, like us but without having to go through what we went through." Robert was silent for a few seconds. Then he sat down beside her, slowly, as if those words needed to settle before being answered. "A retirement home?" he asked. "No," she replied immediately. "Not a retirement home. A home, small houses, a garden, dogs like faithful at every door, bread on the table, not cold rules or hurried nurses. I want the elderly to feel part of something, of a family that won't abandon them." Robert took a long, deep breath. "And with what money? With the little we have, with what people give us, with what we plant? I don't know, but if we were able to start over with empty hands, why not try this?" He kept looking at her. In his eyes there was more than tenderness. There was respect and pride. "Then let's plant something bigger than corn, Mary." During the following days, they spoke with lawyer Benitez to formalize the idea. They looked for the necessary documents to convert a part of the land into property for community use. Teresa and Matthew, without thinking twice, offered to help build the first rooms. The children began to draw how they wanted the space to look. Small houses with tile roofs, large trees, and a patio with colourful chairs. Mr. Henry, upon hearing about the plan, brought wood from Flagstaff. Mrs. Lupe sent quilts and sheets, and a man in town, who heard about it at the market, offered cement at a low price just to see that dream come true. "And what will it be called?" Teresa asked, while kneading the afternoon bread. Mary looked at the notebook, already full of notes, drawings, and underlined phrases. "Refuge, new life," she said firmly, "because that is what this land gave us." The first little house was built in 20 days. It wasn't big or fancy. It had 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a hammock hung under the porch roof. Mary cried when she saw it finished. "We are going to welcome the first one here," she told Robert. "Who?" "I don't know yet, but he will come, and when he arrives, we will wait for him with hot bread and a clean blanket." Robert nodded. He felt that for the first time, his old age had purpose. They were no longer survivors. Now they were builders. One afternoon, while the children were watering the rows and Teresa was knitting on the porch, Mary saw an older man sitting on a bench in the town square. She had noticed him before, always alone, always with the same broken shoes and his gaze fixed on the ground. She approached carefully. "Good afternoon," she greeted him. The man barely looked up. "Do you have family?" Mary asked gently. "Not anymore," he replied. "They died, or they left. It's the same." "Where do you sleep?" "Wherever the night catches me." Mary gave him a loaf of bread. "If you want, come with me tomorrow. I want to show you something." The man didn't say anything, but the next day he was at the entrance of the property with a plastic bag and a faded cap. Mary took him to the new little house. "You can sleep here, eat, take care of the chickens if you want. You don't have to pay anything. Just stay and don't give up." The man sat on the chair on the porch, touched the hammock with one hand, and whispered, "No one has spoken to me like that in years." His name was Theodore. He was 78 years old, and that night he slept under a dignified roof for the first time in almost a decade. At dusk, Mary sat by the fire. Robert carved wood with Teresa's grandchildren. Faithful slept at the entrance of Theodore's room, as if he already recognized him as part of the pack. "What if this grows bigger than we can handle?" Robert asked, in a low voice. "Then we will grow too," Mary said. "We already did it once." Robert looked at her tenderly, but before he could say anything, Faithful suddenly got up. He growled. He approached the fence and stood still, his body tense. Mary stood up. She looked towards the entrance. In the shadows of the road, a tall figure watched in silence. He didn't make a move to get closer. He just remained there, motionless, as if it hurt him to step on that land again, and he still didn't dare to touch it. The first months of the refuge were of constant work, long days and nights of rain that dampened the newly built walls. The land, however, responded generously. The corn grew strong, the bread sold like never before, and the people in town began to refer to the place with respect, calling it the grandparents' ranch, as some children called it. There were already 4 houses built, occupied by 3 widows and Mr. Theodore, the first to arrive. Mary was in charge of the medicine, the bread, the shared meals. Teresa and her children had become pillars. Robert, increasingly quiet, continued with his daily tasks, although his back complained every dawn. Faithful, as always, watched everything without rest. One afternoon, while Mary was gathering herbs from the medicinal garden they had started cultivating, she heard voices near the entrance. Faithful barked loudly. It was a different bark, not of threat, but of warning. Mary dropped the basket and walked toward the fence. An unknown older man was arguing with Matthew, raising his voice. "What you are doing here is not charity, it's a business," the man said with a bitter tone. "You disguise yourselves as good people, but you are using the elderly to gain fame." "Who told you that?" Matthew asked, surprised. "No one is profiting here. Everything is shared." "That's what you say, but rumors are circulating in town that a bossy lady is getting rich with donations she doesn't even report, that she has the elderly working without paying them, that even foreign money is coming in." Mary froze. She took a few steps forward. "Good afternoon," she said firmly. "I am the bossy lady, as you call me, and I assure you that not 1 cent here is used for anything other than food, medicine, or shingles for the roofs." "Who sent you to say that?" The man looked at her with suspicion. "No one sent me, but we all know that your son returned with resentment, and that now there are brothers of yours who won't forgive you for what you are building here." Mary felt a pang in her chest. She didn't need to hear names. She knew that those words carried the venom of Stephen. That same night, Mrs. Lois, one of the residents, approached Mary with eyes full of anger. "Is it true that you are keeping the donations?" she blurted out. "Because if so, I won't let myself be used. I have worked all my life. I don't need anyone to give me anything with hidden conditions." Mary tried to calm her. "Mrs. Lois, who told you that?" "At the corner store, a woman who says she knows your son, that you are using the elderly to get on television. Are you going to deny that?" "We don't even have a television here," Mary said, hurt. "All we want is for no one else to sleep alone on the street. But if you don't trust, it's not that. It's just that I was betrayed once by my daughter, and I'm not going to fall for it again. Mary understood, but she still broke inside. The next day, Mary didn't leave her room. Teresa looked for her several times, but she said she was tired. Robert sat next to her with a cup of coffee. "Are you going to let yourself be defeated by gossip?" he asked. "They are not gossip, Robert. They are wounds that return. People need very little to believe the worst. It is enough for someone to repeat it with rage for them to believe it with certainty. And what do? Nothing. We keep going. But inside me, something broke, again. Faithful was lying at her feet. He raised his head and looked at her with those eyes that seemed to say more than any human could say. Mary stroked his head tenderly. "You know who we are, don't you?" That week, two elderly people decided not to accept the room that was offered to them. One said he preferred the street, rather than getting involved in a place where old people are manipulated for advantage. The other didn't even explain. He simply left. Teresa confronted Mary that night. "You can't let the venom extinguish you," she told her. "This place exists because of you. If you fall, everything collapses. And if no one believes in me, Teresa, what's the point? We do believe. Matthew, the children, faithful. Everyone here knows the truth. Don't give those who want to see you defeated that satisfaction." Mary remained silent, looking out the window. The moon was high, and the new roofs shone like silver. "What if Stephen returns?" she asked softly. "Then you will have to look him in the eyes and show him that you are not what he wanted to destroy." Mary turned to Teresa. "I'm not afraid of him, but it hurts that it comes from one of my sons." The next day, upon waking up, Mary found an envelope under the door. It had no return address. It only said, "For you, with what is yours." Inside, there was a handwritten note. "Rumors end when the heart that feeds them is extinguished. Take care of yours. Not everyone is on your side." There was no signature, but the handwriting was familiar. Mary recognized it instantly. It was Stephen's handwriting. And at the bottom of the envelope, among the folded paper, was a newspaper clipping, an old photograph. Mary held a tray of bread in the town square, surrounded by elderly residents of the refuge, and at the bottom, an underlined phrase, "The kind face of old age." Mary closed her eyes. Outside, Faithful barked twice, not as a warning, but as an alarm. The early morning arrived wrapped in a thick fog that covered the entire field, as if the earth wanted to hide from the coming day. Mary didn't sleep. The newspaper clipping and the note written by Stephen were still on the table, next to the shawl she had dropped when she read those words. Faithful didn't move from her side all night. He had barked twice, yes. But then he sat in front of the door, like a statue, alert, silent, his gaze fixed on nothing, as if sensing a different storm, more dangerous than rain or thunder. When dawn broke, Mary prepared coffee as usual, although without tasting it. The kitchen was silent. Robert entered with a slow step. "Did you sleep at all?" She shook her head. "I don't need to. What I need is to understand." He didn't ask any more questions. He took a cup and sat next to her. Faithful got up, stretched his paws, and went out into the courtyard. He stopped mid-stride. Something caught his attention. At the entrance of the refuge, Mr. Allen, one of the newest residents, was arguing loudly with Mrs. Lois. "They bring us here in exchange for being the image of their project," he shouted. "We are not a stamp for pamphlets." "Shut up, Allen." "Don't say what you don't know," Mrs. Lois retorted. "And how do you know it's not true? Did you see the donations?" Do you know how much money moves here? Faithful ran to stand between them. He didn't bark, but he planted himself like a guardian, stubborn, firm, ready to intervene if the voices went up another notch. Mary came out when she heard the discussion. She walked slowly, her face tired but determined. What is going on here? Mr. Allen looked at her with eyes full of rage or fear, or perhaps old wounds that no one had healed. I want to know who you really are, Mrs. Mary, because if it turns out that all this is a facade, I'm leaving, and I'm not leaving alone. Mary took a deep breath. She opened her mouth to answer, but didn't get the chance. From one of the houses, Matthew appeared staggering, helped by his eldest son. He leaned on the doorframe and spoke with a voice broken by illness. She doesn't need to defend herself against anyone, and least of all against people who arrived when everything was already sown, built, and worked on. We are not talking to you, old man, Mr. Allen spat out. But I am talking to you, Matthew retorted. Mary not only gave me a roof, she gave me dignity. And you? How much have you sown? What have you given besides complaints? Teresa also came out, with a cloth in her hand and her face red with anger. Enough. This is not a business. It's a refuge. What do you think? That we have money to spare? We eat here because Mary gets up at 4 to bake bread, because Robert with his bad knees still walks the rows, because my children walk to town to deliver every bag of bread. Allen lowered his gaze, but the damage was already done. Several residents were in the hallways, listening. The seeds of the rumour had fallen on fertile ground. Mary didn't cry. She just turned and went back into her house. Faithful followed her. Teresa went after her, but Mary raised her hand so she wouldn't speak. She locked herself in. She didn't come out even for dinner. Faithful didn't either. The afternoon fell. A strange breeze blew through the trees. Teresa decided to act. She gathered the residents in the courtyard, under the shade of the mesquite tree. You all know what this place has meant, she said firmly. It's not perfect. We don't have luxuries. But there is respect, hot bread, and someone who listens. You can't buy that. You can't invent that. Mary built it with her bones, and if we don't defend her now, then we deserve for this to end. Mrs. Lois, who had been silent, raised her voice. I also doubted. I admit it. Fear got the better of me. But I never saw Mary keep a cent. She is always giving to us, and sometimes that hurts too. Mr. Theodore nodded. I used to sleep in a junkyard before coming here. Today I have a bed, soup, and a dog that takes better care of me than my family. I'm not leaving. Teresa looked at the others. Then go to her. Tell her. Not with flowers. With truth. Because the only thing that breaks a rumour is a truth spoken out loud. As night fell, Mary was still sitting on her bed. Faithful slept by her feet. She hadn't moved. She hadn't eaten. Suddenly someone knocked on the door. Mary. It was Teresa. I don't want to talk. I didn't come alone. The door opened. Slowly, Mrs. Lois, Mr. Theodore, Matthew, helped by his son, and almost everyone who lived there entered. They brought freshly baked bread, a jug of coffee, and a small hand-knitted blanket. Mrs. Lois knelt in front of her. Forgive me, I doubted you, but only because life taught me to distrust. It wasn't your fault. Mary broke down in tears. I just wanted no one else to feel what I felt that day on the highway. Matthew took her hand. That's why, Mary. That's why we are here. Faithful stood up. He walked to the door. He growled. A few seconds later, the wood creaked again. Slow footsteps approached. A body appeared in the doorway. It was Andrew. His eyes were red, his hands empty, and his voice was trembling. Mom, I came alone. I don't know if it's too late, but if I can still help, I'm ready. The refuge woke up with a calmer air, although the night before had been turbulent. Mary had woken up in her bed with her heart still racing, remembering the image of Andrew in the doorway. She could still feel the warmth of his trembling hands when he dared to say, "I came alone," before entering. Faithful didn't move away for an instant, looking at him with the eyes of someone who recognizes someone, but doesn't forget what they did. Andrew spent the night sitting on the porch without taking off his shoes. Teresa brought him a cup of tea, but he barely tasted it. Robert observed him from afar, without words. The other residents, upon learning that the youngest son had arrived, remained silent. There were no reproaches or greetings, just a calm expectation. At dawn, Andrew got up and went to the courtyard. Faithful followed him at a short distance, as if evaluating his every move. Andrew knelt down, grabbed a handful of damp earth, and smelled it. "It still smells the same," he murmured, "like when we came here as children." Mary appeared at the door, wrapped in her blue shawl. Her face showed tiredness, but also a spark of strength that had returned with the defense of Teresa and the others. "Why did you come, Andrew?" she asked in a low voice. He turned around. His eyes were red, not from lack of sleep, but from guilt. "Because I can't keep silent anymore," he said. "Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the highway. I saw your eyes, Mum, and I saw myself doing nothing." Mary took a few steps, getting closer. "I never defended you, Andrew. I raised you, but when your brothers made decisions, I thought it was for the best. I didn't know how to see that you—" "I tried to stop them," he interrupted her, his voice breaking. "That night, when we got into the truck with you two in the back, I told Richard and Stephen that it wasn't right, that they couldn't leave you. They threatened me. They told me that if I spoke, they would take everything away from me, and I kept quiet. I couldn't stand up to them." Mary felt the air catch in her chest. Andrew's eyes were fixed on the floor. "What they did is unforgivable," he continued. "And I was a coward. I came because I can't carry this alone anymore. I came because I want to ask for your forgiveness, even if you don't give it to me." Silence filled the courtyard. The wind moved the branches of the mesquite tree, and the fallen leaves seemed to whisper to each other. Faithful approached and sat at Mary's feet, as if supporting her with his presence. She reached out a hand. It trembled. Andrew looked at her, hesitating. "Forgiveness is not a paper you sign," Mary said, her voice broken. "It is a journey, and you just took the first step. If you truly want to be here, you will have to prove it with actions, not with words." Andrew nodded. Tears were on his face, but his eyes shone with something new, determination. "I will do it, even if it takes the rest of my life." Robert then appeared, with a bucket of water in his hand. He looked at Andrew and spoke for the first time. "No one needs speeches here. We need hands and loyalty." Andrew stood up. "You have them." That day, Andrew worked from morning until afternoon. He helped put up planks, carried sacks, cleaned corrals. The children watched him with curiosity. Faithful, at first, didn't leave his side, but when he saw him carrying firewood without anyone asking him to, he relaxed and followed him at a less close distance. Matthew, sitting in his chair, smiled as he watched him pass. "That boy has something in his heart," he said. "I hope it's enough." Mary watched him from the window while kneading bread. Teresa approached her. "It's not easy for him," she murmured. "But not for you either." "No, but if he wants to walk this path, I will accompany him." As evening fell, when everyone had eaten dinner, Mary found Andrew sitting by the fire, with Faithful at his side. The dog had his head resting on his legs. Andrew stroked his back, respectfully. "When we were children," he said without looking at her, "we had a dog. We abandoned him in the woods because Richard said he was a burden. I could never forget it. And now I see Faithful, and it reminds me of what I failed to defend." Mary took a deep breath. She sat down next to him. "Sometimes animals are more family than blood, because they don't abandon you." Andrew looked at her with teary eyes. "I want to be like that dog, Mum. I want to stay, not run away again." She gently touched his cheek. "Then stay, and work, and be quiet when you have to be quiet, but speak when necessary. I don't want martyrs. I want sons with a conscience." He nodded. They remained in silence, looking at the fire. Somewhere on the road, a truck stopped without turning off the engine. The low lights illuminated the entrance of the refuge. Inside the vehicle, a silhouette watched, motionless. Then, another one. 2 figures. The engine continued running, but no one got out. Faithful raised his head and growled very softly. Andrew noticed it. He stood up and walked to the door. Mary also got up, with a premonition that squeezed her heart. The lights remained there, motionless, until they suddenly went out. The silence became even deeper. Only the crackling of the fire and the dog's breathing filled the night. And at that moment, Mary knew that the peace of the refuge was fragile. Something was moving in the shadows, something that came from her own past and that had not finished being confronted. The night swallowed the sound of the truck without lights that had stopped in front of the refuge. No one got out. There were no words or gestures, just the still silhouette of the vehicle, and then its slow disappearance in the dust of the road. Mary didn't close her eyes all night. From the window of the room she shared with Robert, she looked towards the entrance without saying a word. She had a premonition stuck in her chest, one that burned her without shape or name, but that she couldn't ignore. The next morning, Andrew went out to sweep the courtyard as usual. He was thinner, but his movements were agile. Sweat was already showing on his forehead early on, and even so he didn't complain. Mary watched him from the porch while stretching a sheet on the clothesline. "Did you sleep well?" she asked him. "Yes, Mum, although I think someone was here last night." Mary hesitated before answering. "I felt it too, but I didn't go down. I didn't have the strength." He left the broom leaning against the wall. "Do you think it was him?" Mary didn't answer. Faithful then appeared from the back of the garden, with his tongue hanging out, panting softly, and in his mouth he carried something, a piece of paper folded several times. He approached Mary, dropped it at her feet, and sat down. It was as if he had been guarding it all night. Mary knelt down, picked it up with trembling hands. Andrew approached, curious. It was a yellowish sheet, written with black pen. The handwriting was familiar, precise, controlled. Mary didn't need to read the signature to know who it was from. "Mum, if you are reading this, it's because I didn't have the courage to knock on the door. I lied to you many times, but not this one. I always saw you. I always knew where you were, but I didn't dare. Because the one who abandons once becomes a shadow, and I became that, a shadow. Sometimes I would come at night, just to see if you were still alive, and every time I did, I felt less like a son and more like a coward." Mary swallowed. Andrew put a hand on her shoulder. She continued reading in silence, the words tightening her throat. Andrew wanted to stop us that night. We threatened him. Yes, with taking everything away from him, with leaving him alone too. And we did it, because we thought we were right. I did it. I abandoned you. There are no excuses. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to leave my guilt in writing, and to say that, even if I never return, I know what you are worth. And I know that everything you built is greater than what we destroyed. I watched you, and I felt envy, because you were a mother until the end. Even when we tore out what hurt the most, you were stronger than all of us put together. I am not dead, but I no longer live. I just exist far away, and I deserve that too. Mary closed her eyes. The wind moved her shawl. Andrew didn't say anything. He knew that this moment did not belong to him. It belonged to her. On the last line, the handwriting changed. It was looser, as if the hand that wrote could no longer hold the pain. I didn't dare to enter, but I was always here. Richard. Mary hugged the paper against her chest. Faithful watched her in silence. I knew, she whispered. I felt it. Every time the wind changed, every time Faithful barked at the road, it was him, my invisible son. Andrew knelt beside her. Do you forgive him? Mary caressed the paper with her fingers. I don't know, but finally I can mourn him, not as an enemy, but as what he was, a son who was lost, and who at least stopped to write. That afternoon, Mary called Teresa. She asked her to gather everyone in the courtyard. When everyone was present, Matthew, the children, Mrs. Lois, Mr. Theodore, the other women, and Andrew. Mary stood in front of the mesquite tree and read the letter aloud. No one interrupted her. The silence was thick, full of respect. When she finished, she looked at everyone with red but firm eyes. I share this with you because the refuge is also for those who regret, for those who didn't know how to return. This place was born from abandonment, but it will not live from resentment. I want us to always remember that. Matthew nodded with his eyes closed. Mrs. Lois wiped away a tear. Faithful, lying near the tree, wagged his tail only once. That night, Mary put Richard's letter in a wooden box, along with the deed to the land, the first bread recipe she wrote by hand when Andrew was a child, and an old black and white photo where the 5 of them were: her, Robert, Richard, Stephen, and Andrew. No one was smiling, but they were all together. She closed the box carefully. This is what remains of my past, she told Robert. Now we have to take care of what is coming. He nodded in silence. The next day, without prior notice, a letter arrived from the north, signed with a name that no one had spoken aloud for months. Not Richard. Another name. It was Stephen, and with that letter came an unexpected request. For days, Faithful walked slower. He no longer ran behind the children, nor did he lie down in the doorway to watch the coming and going of the refuge. He stayed in the shade, next to Mary, as if something inside him knew that his body was shutting down, but his soul was not. Mary was the first to notice. He no longer gets up when I open the oven, she whispered one morning, while gently stroking his back. Maybe he's tired, Andrew said, although deep down he already knew that wasn't it. Faithful was reaching that moment that every faithful dog reaches, where he no longer moves by instinct, but by love, by farewell. Robert prepared an old mattress and placed it next to his bed. Teresa brought a clay pot and filled it with fresh water. The children took turns brushing his fur. Faithful looked at them with his moist eyes, without complaining, without fear. He was just present. One night, Mary couldn't sleep. Faithful had spent the day almost motionless, and his breathing was becoming shallower. She sat on the floor, next to him, covered him with a light blanket, and began to speak to him softly, as if he were a small child. You were with me when my sons turned their backs on me. You accompanied me when I slept in the rain, when I had no bread to bake, when no one else looked at me with love. You weren't just a dog, Faithful. You were family, you were strength when there was none left. Faithful wagged his tail only once. Don't leave without knowing how much I thank you, son, she whispered, because that's what you were, a son who never abandoned me. Matthew approached that morning with a cane in one hand and a hot loaf of bread in the other. Mary, may I come in? She invited him in with a nod of her head. Faithful rested, but his eyes remained open. Mary stroked him without stopping. My father used to say that dogs don't leave. They transform. They become shadows under the trees, sound among the leaves, the smell of hot bread, when everything seems lost. Mary smiled, with tears in her eyes. Your father was wise. He was, but he never knew a dog like this one. At dusk, everyone at the refuge found out. Teresa gathered the residents, and little by little they began to arrive at the room, one by one, in silence. No one spoke. No one asked questions. They stood up, forming an invisible circle around Mary and Faithful. Andrew sat on the floor, on the other side. Robert turned off the main light and lit a candle. Today the first one is leaving us, Mary said firmly. And it's not an old man or a lady without family. It is a being that gave us more loyalty than many humans, and I want us to honor him as he deserves. Mrs. Lois brought a knitted blanket closer. The children placed dried flowers on the mattress. Faithful breathed slowly, but still looked at Mary with that clean gaze that only good animals know. Past midnight, Mary felt Faithful's body relax completely. She leaned in, kissed his head, and told him in his ear, Fly, my friend. You will always be here. Faithful took one last breath. Then, silence. The burial took place at dawn, next to the large mesquite tree, there where Faithful used to lie down to watch everything from afar. Teresa finished with Andrew. The children formed a line with stones. Mary wrapped the body in the blue blanket. Mrs. Lois said a simple prayer. Matthew recited a fragment of a ballad that spoke of brave symbols. Robert placed a hand-carved wooden plaque with the inscription, Faithful, the dog who never abandoned us. Mary left a piece of bread next to the wooden cross. So you won't be hungry wherever you go, she said. Then she slowly walked away. She didn't cry anymore. She had done everything. She had said goodbye without it becoming a bitter farewell. That afternoon, Andrew found something hidden in one of the old boxes that Mary had kept after the trial. It was a notebook. Inside, between bread recipes and numbers written in pencil, he found a note. It was Richard's handwriting. Mom, Andrew called, entering the room. There's something else. She looked up. Andrew approached with the notebook open to the page marked by a dried eucalyptus leaf. He read aloud. If you don't find me one day, and this dog is still here, you will know that he was braver than me, because he stayed, because he chose to stay, as I never knew how. Mary closed her eyes. Inside, something settled in her soul. One more piece that found its place. But as night fell, an unexpected sound broke the calm. A sharp, different, young bark came from the gate, and what was about to cross was not just another animal, it was a symbol. It was the promise that what was lost can be reborn. The sharp bark broke the silence of the early morning like an unexpected bell. It was different from Faithful's, sharper, younger, more nervous. Mary got up with her heart pounding, as if the sound had touched a place that was still raw. She opened the door carefully. The sky was still dark blue, a prelude to dawn. At the entrance of the refuge, right in front of the wooden gate, a trembling figure waited. A thin little dog with light fur, spots on her paws and floppy ears, big eyes and a shy look. "Robert," Mary whispered from the door. "Come and see." He came out, adjusting his sweater. Andrew also approached, barefoot. Teresa and the children were already peeking out the dining room window. The little dog didn't move. She trembled. She smelled of the street, of dirt, of dry rain. She had visible ribs and a scar on one of her hind legs. Even so, she didn't look away. She watched Mary as if she had recognized her before. Mary knelt down. She didn't say anything. She extended a hand. The little dog hesitated. She took a step, another, until slowly she approached and put her snout in Mary's lap. She nestled there, without making a single sound. "She's scared," Teresa said, "but she's also hopeful." Mary gently stroked her. "Then she already has a name." "A name?" Mary smiled. "Her name is Hope." In the following days, Hope became part of the refuge as if she had always been there. She slept at the foot of the mesquite tree, next to Faithful's grave, as if guarding his memory. She wasn't playful like a puppy. She was a wise, prudent little dog who moved in silence and only barked when she sensed something wasn't right. The children adored her. Andrew built a small wooden house for her, but she preferred to sleep next to Mary at the entrance of the room, as Faithful had done. Mary didn't argue. Inside her, she knew that this animal had not arrived by chance. It was a sign, a cycle that was closing and another that was beginning. One afternoon, Mary went to town with Teresa to buy flour and medicine. On the way, an older woman approached them. "Are you the lady from the refuge?" she asked. "Yes," Mary replied with a smile. "Your story was told on the radio. They say you lost a dog that was like a son, and that now you have another one." Mary lowered her gaze. "Yes, her name is Hope." The woman was moved. "I wish all stories of abandonment ended with a name like that." Upon returning, Mary sat on the bench in the courtyard, with the little dog resting next to her. Robert brought her a cup of coffee. "Are you thinking about Faithful?" he asked. "I always think about Faithful," she replied. "But today not with sadness. Today with gratitude. He brought us here. He sustained us when no one else did." Robert put a hand on her knee. "And this little dog?" "She came to remind us." Hope raised her head and looked at them. Then she got up and walked to Faithful's grave. She lay down on the earth, as if protecting his memory. Mary approached. She lit a small candle on a flat stone next to the wooden cross. "Where loyalty ends, hope begins," she said softly. Days later, Mary decided to turn that space into a place of remembrance. Next to the mesquite tree, Andrew planted 3 flowers, one for each stage of his life since he returned. The children painted a stone with the names of all the animals that had passed through the refuge. Teresa hung a clay bell that sounded softly when the wind blew. The place became sacred, a corner where new residents would go to reflect, or cry, or remember what they had lost. Mary named it the Corner of Those Who Stayed, and there, between Faithful's grave and the shadow of the tree, Hope sat every afternoon. One morning, while Mary was sweeping the entrance, she received one more letter. It had no return address. It only said, "I couldn't come back, but I'm still listening." It was accompanied by a photograph, one of the first houses of the refuge with the children running, and Faithful in the middle of them. Mary handed it to Andrew. Did you write it? He shook his head. No, I'm already here. That letter is from someone who still doesn't know how to return. Mary pressed the paper against her chest. Then we will wait for him. At dusk, Hope ran towards the entrance, barking excitedly. No one was coming behind. No car. No figure. Only the wind. But Mary, seeing her so restless, knew that she wasn't barking into the void. Someone had stepped on that land again, and time was beginning to run out. The years passed like the breeze passes through the cactus, in silence without asking permission, but leaving traces on the earth. The new life refuge grew more than Mary and Robert ever imagined. Where there used to be mesquite trees and stones, now there were a dozen simple houses with tile roofs, a fertile garden, fruit trees, and a common patio where coffee was never missing. Some of those who arrived at the refuge in the early days were no longer there. They had passed away peacefully, with their heads held high and their hearts calm, knowing that their old age was dignified, that they did not die forgotten. Others were still there, planting, knitting, cooking, laughing with Teresa's grandchildren, who were already teenagers. Hope, the white little dog with the noble gaze, was still alive. Aged, yes, with slow pause, but with the same habit of lying down under Faithful's cross every dusk, as if still standing guard. Mary, sitting in her rocking chair, watched everything from her house's porch. Her face had more wrinkles, but also more peace, the look of someone who no longer fears the end, because she has lived long enough to understand that what is important is not what is lost, but what is left behind. Robert went out every morning to walk among the rows. He no longer planted, but he checked the plants as if they were children he had cared for all his life. Andrew was now the one who organized everything: the daily bread, the cleaning of the refuge, the purchases in town. He had aged with gratitude etched into his skin, and his loyalty to his parents was stronger than any wound from the past. One autumn afternoon, while dry leaves crunched under the footsteps of the town children who came to visit, Andrew entered Mary's room with a letter in his hand. "Mum," he said softly, "I found this among the old books on the desk. It is signed by Richard." Mary looked at him without surprise, as if she already knew that this letter would appear exactly when it had to appear. Andrew opened it and began to read aloud. "I don't know if I will ever be able to return, but if I don't come back, I want you to know that I did live, although hidden, that every bark of Faithful, every loaf of bread you baked, every flower you planted, I knew about it, because I always watched you from where no one could see me. I was not brave, I was not fair, but I loved in silence, and that is also loving. Forgive me for not knowing how to return. Forgive me for not being worthy of this place. But thank you, because even without me you made life worthwhile. Mum, Dad, forgive me, and thank you. I was always here." Andrew closed the letter with trembling hands. Mary no longer cried. She just caressed the paper like someone caressing a memory. Robert, from the door, nodded. We always knew he was close, and now he can rest. Mary looked at the garden, saw Hope lying in the shade, the children playing, the refuge full of life, and us too. That night, under the stars, Mary asked for candles to be lit throughout the refuge, one at each door, one at Faithful's cross, one next to the garden entrance, and another next to the bench where Richard used to watch them from afar, without daring to touch. Everyone gathered. Mary stood up. Her legs trembled, but her voice did not. This refuge was born from abandonment, but it grew through love, true love, the one that doesn't shout, the one that doesn't show off, the one that stays, the one that returns. the one that accompanies you until the end. Teresa hugged Mary, Andrew hugged Robert. Hope, with her slow gait, approached Faithful's grave, lay down, and sighed as if she too was closing a chapter. The new life refuge was complete. And so ends this story, a story that was born in the mud of a highway and blossomed in rows of dignity. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel to continue accompanying us in every story full of soul, life, and truth. Give this video a thumbs up, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming. And if you want to support this project so we can continue sharing more stories like this, you can leave a super thanks. And now, tell me, if you made it to the end of this story, write the word rebirth in the comments. That way I will know that you are one of those who, like Faithful, never abandon. Thank you for staying until the last breath. See you in the next story.